Well, thank you so much for joining me, Priyanka. I'm super excited to hear your story. You were diagnosed relatively recently, but I feel like it was as a long journey to get there as it was for many of us. So why don't you walk
Yeah.
me through your when you got your diagnosis and what was happening in your life at the time that really led you to kind of to connect the dots and think you should look into ADHD.
Right. So I think I'm going to backtrack a little bit because whenever I try and tell this story, I say something and I'm like, oh, wait, no. So this happened a few months ago. Oh, wait, no, this happened last year. So let me start right from the beginning. I feel like my whole childhood, teenage years, I did have a lot of mental health difficulties and self-esteem issues, problems, and it wasn't really something which I acknowledged. Because especially within my culture as well, because I'm Indian, mental health isn't something which is really spoken about. And I had a lot of difficulties when I left uni, and then it was when I moved up to Manchester with my partner. And I feel when you become an adult and you have the adult responsibilities of, bills and living and stupid things like having to put the bins out. And, there's something called council tax here, which I didn't even realize we had to pay. So, there's all these little things that we just can't cope with and find it really stressful. So I had a lot of things happen to me, unfortunately. We got robbed. I lost my granddad. I had a diagnosis of endometriosis. I then lost up to 50% on my hair with alopecia. I think I had a patch about this big. Yeah, it was horrific, and that was all because of the stress because I wasn't coping well. So I reached out to my GP, who diagnosed me with depression because, of course, as we all know, usually we go to our GPs with these sort of symptoms. And yeah, I had a diagnosis of depression for, I think it went for about a year. Medication wasn't really helping. There was a small benefit, but I still knew something was going on because it just wasn't making sense. I wasn't really depressed or sad anymore. I was just very frustrated and all over the place. So, I was actually one of the people who saw a video on TikTok. I am a massive advocate for TikTok. I know there's a lot of controversy with it, but I do feel TikTok it is the reason as to why I have my diagnosis today and why things have just, got done a 180 in a good way for me. Um, so I saw a TikTok about the symptoms in women, and I was just like, wow, this really resonates with me. This is really strange. And then I think what we all do, we just end up going on Google, looking for hours on end and just, diagnosing ourselves and looking into all the symptoms. And, I work in mental health myself. So I knew the diagnostic criteria and what to look for. So I was so sure I was going on the right track. And I brought it up to my doctor, who they were just like, no, you don't have ADHD. You don't have ADHD. There's no way you do. Let's try a different antidepressant. They switched me, saw no help. Saw another GP, was met with the same, they told me the same thing. I was going to therapy as well. I mentioned it during my therapy session, but it was kind of brushed over, and I felt a bit too stupid to mention it again. So, I think all these things that were happening, it was just really putting me down. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm just being dramatic. Maybe I don't have ADHD. It's probably just me overthinking. But the more things were getting worse, I was like, no, I need to have an answer. Even if I don't have it, at least I need to know if it's ruled out or not. So I went into my GP, literally all guns blazing. I was like, I am not leaving until you get me a referral done because I need answers. Like, my life is spiraling out of control. You are switching me on so many medicines. Nothing is working. Like, it's medical negligence if you don't do this. So luckily I managed to get a referral. We'll probably go into speaking about this, about the waiting times, but here in the UK, it's horrific, the best way to put it. I think it's about 2 to 3 years at the moment just to get the initial questionnaire sent to you. But unfortunately, because my mental health was deteriorating significantly, I had to leave my job. I had to move back home for a few months. My relationships with my friends, my partner, everything was breaking down. So I was at risk of suicide as well. So they managed to speed up my diagnosis. And, when I got diagnosed, it was, I think all of us go through the stages of grief. We feel like really angry. We feel a bit betrayed. I can't even remember the 5 stages of grief, but I do remember reading it and was like, this really resonates with me. And then, yeah, so I got diagnosed and was put on medication. And you know what? My life has, it's completely transformed since finding this out. And I feel every day, you know, when you have ADHD, you kind of learn more and more about it. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, this makes sense. And everything just starts to piece together. And, you know, it's really strange because it's like, wow, I've been dealing with this my whole life and I had no idea. And now everything seems to make sense. And I can finally get on the right path and, you know, actually start to live a normal, and I say that in quotes, you know, life. I just, I'm still waiting for ADHD coaching. I did have an initial session today to kind of, I think they just told me what the coaching was about. So I'm still going to be waiting for my next session, but I feel that will be the final piece of the puzzle. But yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk a lot on this podcast about, the self-diagnosis journey and a lot of the clinical eye rolling around TikTok and
Oh
and
yeah.
and it was just social media in general, and right, all of
Mm-hmm.
this like quote unquote misinformation that's out there, and how people are diagnosing themselves based on a single TikTok video. But it's like, I have yet to meet a person who did not who didn't go through the situation that many of us went through, which was, I saw a single TikTok video, then my whole life flashed before my eyes, and I went into like deep hyper focus and started researching everything. And then all of a sudden, it was like all of these random things in my life made sense. And it was just like,
Yeah.
it just jump starts this profound journey of self-diagnosis, right? And then only then do you then, go to your GP or start to look
Mm-hmm.
for an official diagnosis. Like, nobody has ever been like, oh, I saw one TikTok video about losing my keys and was like, oh, ADHD. Yeah, sure. Why not? Like it, usually there's
Exactly. Yeah.
so much at stake that by the time you get to the doctor where you're like, I really feel like this has explained literally everything, and just like you said, the depression diagnoses, the anxiety diagnoses, never feeling like they were the right fit, and then suddenly
Mm.
having this intense reaction to ADHD. And then so many women going to their doctor and the doctor saying, nah, I don't think that's it. Right.
Yeah. Oh
And
my
then,
God. I
right,
know. Yeah.
so it really, I mean, it bothers me on two levels, because I'm like, first of all, TikTok, just by its very nature, is all neurodivergence, because we're like moths to a flame when it comes to that social media platform, right? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
constant dopamine hits. Like, I'm like, of
Uh,
course it's all ADHD content, because everybody on there has ADHD, right?
the quick videos as well, you know, because we don't have good attention span. So, you know, with TikTok, I mean, now they've increased it to 3 minutes, and I will not watch a video for three
Same,
minutes.
I know.
But, you know, but the fact that there was, you know, short videos on there, I was like, okay, yeah, look, we like this. Oh, next video, next video. You know, it's exactly what you've said. Like, it makes complete sense why there's a lot of that ADHD content on TikTok.
Yeah. Well, and I saw a mental health professional recently talking about the platform of TikTok and how, our brains are not meant to follow video after video where it's like something funny, something sad, something profound, something weird. They're like, it's like our brains are not built to follow that. And I was like, my brain is 100% built to follow that. I was like, this is like the best thing that's ever happened. So that's why I'm like, I still feel like pretty much obviously not everybody, but I feel like the reason why ADHD is talked about so much on a platform like TikTok feels self-evident, because that's how we all end up on a platform like TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
uh, but yeah, I mean, I'm certainly am very frustrated and annoyed by the just gigantic eye roll that is coming from the medical community, that not only the medical
Mm,
community, but the mental health clinician community, of just like everybody thinks they have ADHD, which just feels so profoundly unhelpful, which is, and I've heard you talk about this in the past too, not only on your TikTok videos, but in other interviews, of just like, the reason it's not trendy, right? Like, this is the reason why so many people are seeking a diagnosis right now, is because we're finding this out for the first time about ourselves in this
exactly.
profound
Yeah.
way. And it's so meaningful. And, I liken it to something I heard on John Oliver recently, which I don't know if you follow that show. But he was talking about he was actually talking about non-binary, and the idea of like, oh, everybody's non-binary nowadays, and the same kind of eye roll to this trend. um, and he was using the example of left-handedness, and how when teachers stopped forcing children to become right-handed in kindergarten.
Mm.
And in primary school, like once they stopped doing that, the cases of left-handedness skyrocketed because people were
Yeah.
allowed to be left-handed. And he's like, it's the same thing with non-binary. And I was like, and I like to extrapolate and say it's the same thing with ADHD,
Yeah,
right? Where
we
I'm
do
like,
this with everything, don't
right?
we? Like,
But
relate everything to ADHD. Yeah.
but still, it's just this idea of like now that people understand what it's like and or what it even looks like and how much it has affected them over the course of their life. Yes, of course, people are making the connecting the dots and seeking a diagnosis. Anyway, I know I get
Yeah.
so angry too about it. It
And
drives me
I'm exactly the
crazy.
same. I'm sitting here, like my face is getting hot because I'm just like, this whole topic just makes me so angry. Like, I I want to go back to my GP and just like kick down their doors and just like, look, I told you, like you were wrong, you should have listened to me. And it's just the whole concept of this ignorance. Like I do feel that there are some GPs who do listen, and do understand, but it's like you said, I do not understand why they are so skeptical when it comes to TikTok because, I'm a medical professional, I'm a pharmacist. I share content on TikTok in regards to ADHD. If someone went to a doctor's appointment based on one of my videos, where's the difference between, having to speak to me in person rather than seeing something on social media? And, if someone has ADHD themselves, they're sharing their own experiences and you might relate. And we can get these ideas about diagnosis in our head from all sorts of things, not just social media. So why do they think social media is such, a bad thing? And, it's horrible to kind of, mock in a way these patients who are coming for help, especially when, when we have ADHD, it takes a lot of guts to even go to your doctor about this kind of stuff. We don't have great self-esteem and we don't have a lot of motivation. So to actually just even get to the doctor is a big thing for us. So, even if they don't think we're right, just, let us find out. And as a healthcare professional, don't dismiss us, don't mock us. You're meant to be there to help us and care for us.
Yeah, I know, right? Curiosity, like what, just have some curiosity and like you said, listen to the patient's lived experience is another thing I think is so important
Mm-hmm.
too, right? It's that is so much more important in terms of the next step than whatever you're learning on the DSM. And also, I understand the concern from a clinician point of view, which is like, well, maybe it's not ADHD. Get a professional opinion, look into it. Yes, all
Mm-hmm.
of those things. However, if it's not ADHD, what is it in that situation? Because if the
Yeah.
default is, well, it's just depression or it's just anxiety, then it's like, no, we've been over this, right? I heard a lecture
Yeah.
recently by William Dodson, who's a psychologist or actually a psychiatrist in the U.S., and he was just talking about how, like, of all the thousands of patients he's seen with ADHD, a precursor in almost everyone was a combined diagnosis of depression and anxiety, to the point where he could actually predict that if that combination of diagnosis, it's almost guaranteed that you probably have ADHD just from that
Yeah.
alone, right? And I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. But anyway, um, so now you had mentioned, okay, two things you had mentioned I want to go back to, which was, your GP initially saying you don't have ADHD, that it was just
Mm-hmm.
depression. What do you think the GP was, we talk a lot about that, um, the depression diagnosis and
Mm-hmm.
doctors saying like, well, you went to school, you did well, you're bright, like all of these kind of
Good. Yeah.
stereotypes of what a person with ADHD isn't. Is that what you were experiencing?
Yeah. So I think it was definitely a mix of that because I mean, if you just take a look at me, even based on paper, I would say that I'm successful. I have, I'm a clinical pharmacist, I own a house, I have a stable relationship, my health is good. I'm a woman, you look at all these things and I do not fit the typical stereotype of someone who has ADHD. So I feel when it was something that was brought up, even my friends and family were skeptical because this also goes back to the stereotype of what people think ADHD is. Even the word ADHD just sounds childish. I don't think it's a great way to describe this condition as well. I do think they need to review it because we don't have a deficit of attention. We just can't regulate it in the right way. So yeah, I definitely think it was to do with that. And also, just stigma as well, because I just don't think there is great awareness, even in the medical professional, where you would expect it to be, for them to actually understand, how these symptoms show, particularly in women. It's very difficult for women. I'm, I've done a lot of research into this, and there's so much which we have to deal with in terms of the fact that we show different symptoms. We're more likely to show the inattentive symptoms, and because we want to try and fit into societal standards, we mask our symptoms. So people don't even see it if we have these symptoms. And there's so many things which affect us in terms of like hormonal changes and just the expectations of being a woman. And I think all of this combined together just make it so difficult for us to get the acknowledgement, get a diagnosis. But I feel like because my symptoms appeared to be depressive symptoms, there's a lot of overlap between depression, anxiety, ADHD. And GPs, they are more skilled to diagnose depression and anxiety. They're not specialists with ADHD, so it's not something they usually would even think about. So if you see a woman who's lacking motivation to get to work, who's tired all the time, who seems a bit forgetful, who seems really tired, you're going to think, oh, she probably has depression. You're never going to think, oh, she might have ADHD, because it's not within their speciality. But this is where the issue is, like, okay, if it's not in your speciality, why are you not potentially just considering it? Like, have an awareness of what the symptoms are and getting a referral done, so at least she knows. So yeah, that's my take of when it comes to GPs and ADHD, particularly with women. Yeah.
Right. And I also feel like, from my own personal experience, because I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety starting in university and then just on for years and years. But I always felt like, get curious about what is causing the depression and anxiety too, because I think also there's a tendency to look at depression in a vacuum, that it's like, well, you just have depression, like you caught the flu. And that there isn't much curiosity into what's causing it. And I think one of the things I hear in my experience, and one of the things I hear with a lot of the women I talk to who were also diagnosed with depression, is that feeling of being broken, is that feeling of being a disappointment, right? Is that feeling of confusion, which is like, I feel like I am an intelligent person, but I can't do well on tests, right? Or like all of these ways
Yeah.
in
Oh
which
my
we had
God.
that, right?
Yeah.
That feeling like
Mm.
everybody got the manual but me, and that I'm just kind of doing life wrong. Like, there's a very specific type of sadness or confusion that leads to the depression. And I've often talked about this, like, as a wife, as a mother, like, I felt like I was disappointing everybody in my life
Oh my God. I
because
know that's, yeah.
right. And I think that was the first time I really understood that about depression, or why so many of us were so depressed with ADHD, is that feeling of like being out of control, feeling like my actions weren't really aligning with my intentions, right? And so all of that then of course is going to lead to depression, right? You're like, I feel like a shit human. So right.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, like, it's those seem such obvious precursors to me when it comes to like the ADHD experience and the anxiety and the depression. Whereas with talking to a doctor, I just was like, I'm sad, and they're like, here's your medication, and that was it. So
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. I think there's two aspects when it comes to anxiety and depression. So you've either got the misdiagnosis, which is what I was talking about, because the overlap of symptoms, but then you've got the comorbidity, which basically is I think people with ADHD do have diagnosed depression, but that stems from the undiagnosed ADHD. But then, when we go to our GP, because these are the issues we'll go to it, they'll then diagnose us just with the depression without realizing we're depressed because we have ADHD that's not controlled. Like, this is where the issue lies, and why there's just so much confusion, I think. Yeah.
right. And they'll diagnose what they're comfortable with, what they have training in, which is depression and anxiety. Nobody has the
Yeah.
training with ADHD, so they don't want to
Mm.
touch it with a 10-foot pole. Now, the other thing is, you had talked about the grief, right? And it was funny because I actually, after I was diagnosed, I wrote like a 7 stages of an ADHD diagnosis, very similar to the stages of grief, because I
Yeah.
felt like there was that first, there's the denial of like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't have ADHD. ADHD is for boys. And then the
Yeah.
like, these TikTok videos are feeling really relatable. So there's the curiosity, and then there's the elation of like, oh my God, the more I learn, the more this explains everything, and this feeling
Yeah.
of like, oh my, I'm not stupid, I'm not lazy, like all of these things, that these beliefs you had about yourself, just feeling so much hope. But then the
Yeah.
next stage is the grief, right? Which was the and you had mentioned that, like this, the more I think about it, the more I realize, wow, I was really struggling, and the signs were there all along, but nobody saw them, or if they saw them, they didn't know how to help, or didn't want to
Yeah.
help, right? And so now I know you had talked about that well, I guess my question is, when you look back at your childhood, were the signs there all along? What were some of the signs that you see where you're like, oh, clearly the signs were there all along? And then also, you had, I think, mentioned in one of your interviews that you had, when you went back and were talking to your parents about it, your mom had suspected it when you were a kid, but it really didn't kind of want to go there.
Yeah. So I mean, I am still so shocked that it's not something that my parents considered, because I want to tell you a really funny story, which if anyone heard this story about a child, I don't understand why they would not think this child needed to be assessed, sorry. So my mum was pregnant with my sister at the time. I was about 2 years old. She wasn't feeling very well. So, she said to 2-year-old me, I'm going to take a nap. I've left your food on the kitchen table. I've put your TV show on, just sit here. I'll be down in half an hour. And she told me that when she came down, my food had been thrown all over the floor. The bowl had been broken. For some reason, I don't know why the chairs were on the floor as well. I've thrown my toys all over the room. The video cassette was out. I don't even know how I did that as a 2-year-old. And I was running around naked. I'd taken my nappy off and I'd just thrown it. And I was like, Mum, was this my childhood every day? And she said, yes. And I was like, first of all, how did you just not throw me in a bin? Because how do you deal with a child like that? Second of all, why did you not think that there was something going on? Like, this is just not, in my opinion, I don't think that's normal child behavior. I mean, I could be wrong because I'm not a mother, so I have no idea. But, she said that it was down to a few things. So first of all, I was their firstborn child. So they didn't know what a normal, or a neurotypical child would be like. So they just thought, okay, all children are a bit crazy. So, this is probably just what a normal 2-year-old is like. But then also she just, she did not want me on medication. And this is another thing which I've spoken about as well, is, about the stigma of medicating children, which I completely get. As a mother, these drugs, they're controlled drugs. They have a lot of regulations. They've got a lot of monitoring, serious side effects. So I do completely get it. But if your child is struggling this much, to the point that, it's just, they're going to grow up to really struggle, especially in adulthood, because ADHD doesn't go away. You don't grow out of it. Why would you not want to do something to help your child? And then you've also got the cultural stigma, which I can't even remember if I mentioned that at the start of this podcast. I feel like I might have said it, but I can't remember. But yeah, so I don't think my parents wanted the label of a child with ADHD, because, then the parents get blamed. And particularly with our culture, it's like, you need to discipline your child. You got to smack her around, get the rolling pin, beat her, just beat some sense into her, discipline her. That's the kind of attitude that, is within our culture. So, if my parents then went and, told family members, oh yeah, she's been diagnosed with ADHD, they're like, oh, it's your fault. You don't discipline her. You feed her too much sugar. You let her watch too much TV. So I feel like a lot of these things all combined was the reason as to why I was never assessed. And because, I wouldn't have expected my parents to even be aware of the symptoms in adulthood of women. But, if they had been aware of what would happen as I grew up, they might have been able to help me whilst I was, going through puberty or at uni. But unfortunately, none of that happened. And, this then relates back to the grief, because, I feel like once you get diagnosed, you slowly, like you said, look back at everything. And it's just, you just feel so betrayed, because it's like, why was I not given help? Why was I struggling this much? It was so unfair and so unnecessary, when I could have had a happier childhood. I could have had an easier time at uni. A lot of things which have happened to me in my life have been actually due to my undiagnosed ADHD. It's all connecting. So, it is really frustrating, and I'm trying to get over that anger, because I always say that anger harms you more than anyone. But I feel because when you have ADHD, you can't stand injustice. You know, we are very, I don't even know what the word is, but we like to fight for what's right. So when something isn't right, we get really riled up, we get really angry. So I think this anger is something which is quite difficult to let go of, but I'm slowly getting there.
Well, yeah, those are the next phases. So after grief is the resentment of, like we were talking about, that idea of like, how did nobody see this? The light, thinking about the life I could have lived, a lot of that.
Yeah,
And then the sixth stage is understanding. So it's like, okay, here we are. I just did, I did the best I could. Now I realize like I actually am not smart. I'm actually quite intelligent. I'm a very hard worker. I'm starting to see all of the positives about my ADHD brain, some of the
yeah.
things that were amazing. And then the final phase is advocacy, right? Like you were saying, like I am riled up and this needs to change and I am going to change the system, which I feel like you were very like, I'm like, you check all those boxes as soon as you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
As soon as you're diagnosed, you were just like, all right, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna fight the system.
Literally, like all guns blazing. Like, there's a really good cartoon character which I was gonna mention, but it's you know what, it's gonna come to me when I'm doing something stupid like washing up a plate or something. But you know what? Yeah, I wanted to say something, but now I've forgotten. So carry on. It might come to me, it might not.
Well, okay, well, let's talk about the advocacy part then, because yeah, I've had a lot of UK guests, so I have talked a lot about the NHS and the wait times. But you were also mentioning that so a GP does not ever diagnose, right? A GP
Mhm.
refers to then who diagnoses in the UK, who will diagnose you in the UK. There's clinics.
Yeah, so we've essentially got two um the word. So we have the primary care in the UK, which is basically where a patient will initially go to. So that will be, community pharmacies, the doctors, the GPs. And then you have secondary care. And this is where it's split up into specialist services, anything. So physical health, mental health, anything. So you will go to your GP with a problem. If it's something that they can help with, they can solve, they'll obviously do it. But if it's something that's a bit more specialist and the GP's done everything they can, they will then refer you on. So this is what happens when you get an ADHD diagnosis in the UK. So a GP won't give you a diagnosis; they will just refer you. So I don't think many people in the UK are actually aware of a pathway called the right to choose. I don't know if this is something which is in the US or Canada, but so basically, we pay NI tax, which is a tax to fund the NHS system. So, this isn't all free. I really wish it was, but unfortunately it's not. So we do pay, for all of this within our tax. And we actually have the right to choose where we want to be referred to, where we want to be treated. But because many GPs, many patients aren't aware of this, all the GPs just refer to the one place that they know, the one place that's under the NHS within their area. They'll send all the patients there. But there are certain private companies who have commissioning from the NHS. So the NHS they pay them, they fund them to say, okay, we'll give you a certain amount of funding to see NHS patients. And GPs aren't aware that they can actually send patients and refer them to some of these private clinics who actually help with the NHS. And then doing it that way, you won't have a long wait time as much as if you were under the typical NHS services. But now it's come to the point that even those services are getting overwhelmed. And there is one service, Psychiatry UK, who morally I respect so much. They say that they don't think it's right for someone who has paid to get seen faster than someone who hasn't paid. Because at the end of the day, we're all suffering. So they say that the wait time is going to be the same for regardless of if you're being transferred by the NHS or if you're going to be a paying client. So some of the private services through Right to Choose are just not accepting referrals anymore because they just don't have the capacity. So this is the current situation within the NHS right now. It is a hot mess. And it's really saddening because, I've been in that position where you're in limbo and you're waiting for an assessment. And these ADHD clinics, I'm sorry, some of them are so useless. Like they will not tell you when they're going to send you the questionnaires. They'll just say, oh, it's coming. And then when they send you the questionnaires, they'll be like, okay, you've got 2 weeks. Fill them out in 2 weeks. If you don't get them back to us within 2 weeks, you're off the list. And I'm just like, how could you give a more unfriendly ADHD approach to someone with ADHD? You know, like these questionnaires are long. I had to sit down with my parents, you know, with my partner, because I could not do them by myself. And that's, you know, with body doubling, that's something which really works for me. I physically need to have someone there. So, you know, I do not think that these ADHD clinics are sometimes ADHD friendly, which is just weird. It works against us. So yeah, that's how we get our diagnosis. And you know, I think a lot of people are unfortunately having to go down the private route now, with some of the companies that don't take right to choose. And it can be really costly. It can, you know, be up to about £2,000 to include the diagnosis, the titration, medication, follow up, all of that. It's just, yeah, it's very unfair, I think, for us. I don't know why the NHS don't put enough funding in ADHD services. But yeah, this is something which, you know, I really want to work on, and I really want to change, because, you know, it's just morally, it's not right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what have you been launching? You've been doing a research campaign, or what
Yeah.
has been your
So
effort?
my NHS trust, which I work for, they have a research department. So I've always wanted to do research, and then it was like a light bulb moment when I was just like, what do I want to do it in? And I was just like, ADHD in women. Oh my God, I can do something. I can do something. So I went off on a tangent, sent an email, and I was just like, please listen to my idea. I think it is amazing. So they did hear me out, and I did receive some really positive feedback from them. But because I'm just getting into the research field, because I work in secondary care as well, I have to do work based in secondary care initially, and then I can do the issues with access, which is where my passion lies, because I just don't feel women, they have so many barriers when it comes to accessing these services in the first place. And it's due to a lot of things, from GPs to stigma to, the misdiagnosed symptoms to masking to society expectations, so many things. So from my end, I'm going to try and work on secondary services initially. So this relates to the ADHD services itself, which is still going to be really beneficial. So, long waiting times, poor follow-up, issues with prescribing. These are the kind of things which I'm going to hopefully be working on. But it is going to be a very long process. We're impatient people, so it wasn't nice to hear that. I was just like, I want to do it now. Just give me the money. Just let me tell people about all of this. But no, you have to get approved funding. You have to do all this ethics. Like you have to, get all these people on board. Like there was a lot to take in. Like that meeting was, I needed to just step outside for air after that, because there was just so much information being bombarded at me. So I'm in the process of currently applying for a research internship. And I'm going to try and make this sound not too complicated, because I don't want to bore you or the people who are listening. So basically, I'm going to be using this internship to do a scoping review, which basically kind of summarizes and pulls together all the research and evidence about ADHD services in the UK. So I will be seeing what the issues are right now, what has been found, what has been done, and then this will help hopefully then lead me to find out, okay, what are the specific problems within our NHS ADHD services? What can be done? And then that will lead me, I'm going to apply to a pre-doctoral fellowship to then do a qualitative study in which I do surveys, questionnaires, send them out to the appropriate people like the GPs, ADHD clinics, late diagnosed ADHD women, to kind of see, what their views are on this, what their opinions are on this. And then my plan is to do a PhD, do a whole project, do an intervention, for example, implementing some mandatory training for GP surgeries in a small area, and, trialing it, seeing how it goes, comparing their knowledge before and after the training, and then seeing how many patients do they end up referring, how many of them do they rule out ADHD potentially before. There's so many things which can be done. And at the moment within my trust, one of the ADHD services is unfortunately under review at the moment. So they're not accepting new referrals, which has caused a lot of chaos. So, when this happened, as soon as I swear, every time I hear ADHD at work, I'm just like, yes, you called me? Yeah. So as soon as I heard that, I was like, right, okay, I've got something to say about this. So I was telling them about the right to choose. And then I've contacted my chief of pharmacist lead to see what's being done, because the plan is to potentially implement some new ADHD services within our trust. And if that's going to happen, I am going to be the person to help set that up. Like, I am not taking no for an answer. You're going to listen to me. You're going to do things right. We're going to make sure that if an ADHD clinic is set up within our trust, I will make sure that it is done properly. And, I want to try and utilize more practitioners as well, because, the waiting times are ridiculous. And it's because there's not enough prescribers. They use nurses and they use psychiatrists. Is it similar in the US?
Yeah, I mean, there's the, yeah, we also have telehealth too, which I'm not sure how that's happening in the UK, but that's just been an exploding industry too. But it's mostly psychologists and psychiatrists who are doing the bulk of the diagnosing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to try and figure out a way to utilize more healthcare professionals, particularly people like myself. Like, I'm a pharmacist. I'm an expert in medication. Why are you not training us up to help with diagnosing, helping us with prescribing? Like, we are there to help doctors and consultants understand how the drugs work in the body. So why are they not utilizing us with helping with titration? It just doesn't make sense. And that's my plan. Next year, I'm going to be starting my prescribing course. Fingers crossed. I'm going to hopefully get some funding within my trust and then become a prescriber, and then hopefully, then become a titration prescriber for an ADHD clinic. I have spoken to some companies who are open to the idea of having a pharmacist prescriber. And, I feel if I'm one of the rare ones who actually do this, it could lead opportunities to say, look, this works. Pharmacists are going to be very good at helping with ADHD if they're trained up appropriately. So, there's work to be done there. I mean, there's so much. I feel like I have to sit down and write it all, because in my head it's like, what's that meme of Charlie Day when he's got that board
I was
and he's
just
got
gonna
like all
say
the,
that.
all
All the
the
strings.
things that,
Yeah.
that is literally, yeah, that's literally me. Anytime I talk about, the work that I'm trying to do with ADHD services, because there's so much that I want to do. There's so much that can be done, and it's just, trying to figure out the most successful way and the most realistic way to get this done. Because I went in this head on, like, really unrealistically, like, okay, I'm going to get this money. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But yeah, and I'm also going to be involved. So I work for the crisis teams within my NHS trust. So we work with patients who unfortunately have tried to commit suicide or in mental health crisis, and we work with getting them to the right places if they need a hospital bed, if they need long-term community treatment. And I feel like, as a pharmacist, there's a lot of training to be done in that team in terms of medicine. So the ADHD advocate in me was like, oh, let's add a bit of ADHD in there. Let's throw a little bit in there. So I was like to my line manager, like, I'm going to be preparing all the training about the medicine. So I was like, I'm going to add ADHD in. Like, I'm just letting you know. I don't, you might say yes, you might say no, but I really want to add it in because I think it's super important. So, within my trust, within this particular cohort, I'm going to be educating these people on, what to potentially look out for if they're reviewing these patients. If there's a patient in crisis and they go to their homes, and their antidepressants aren't working, they're in financial crisis, they might have taken their license off them from speeding and this and that, look out for these little things and see if there's even a hint, and then refer them all, refer them, like, so that's what I'm going to do. So, there's a lot I'm working on. I'm trying my best to not burn out, but I think, like, when you get so focused and so determined on something, we literally put everything into it. Like, my boyfriend is so sick of me. Like, I swear every single day I'm like, ADHD, 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 and he just rolls his eyes now when I mention it, because he's like, I get it, you love it, you have it, ADHD is your life. But we're just so passionate about wanting, to make changes and do something. So yeah, that's
my husband's in the same boat. I feel like we need a support group for the partners of people with ADHD who have to listen to us talk about it all the time.
Oh my god, you know what? That is really good. I really do think that there's that could be, oh my god, what's the word? The word's gone. I've forgotten the word.
No, I know. I had the same experience with becoming a therapist too, right? Which is like, I've had so many women who really just desperately need the right therapy, myself included. I mean, I feel like I was very lucky. My therapist was diagnosed with ADHD, and then she had me diagnosed because she saw all the signs in me. But
Right.
I feel like so many women have the opposite experience, where their therapists are treating them for depression and anxiety and not making those connections that are so important. And so I was like, and people kept asking me, do you know of any therapists who really understand the adult diagnosis experience in women who have, especially women who have been previously diagnosed with these other comorbidities? And I was like, I don't know of any, like they just don't
Yeah.
exist. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to become a therapist. And then, so I'm getting certified. I'm back doing my master's now. And I'm like, it's driving me
Amazing.
crazy that this is going to take me at least 3 to 6 years. And I'm
I
like, I
know
don't
it's so
have
long. Like we want it now. Just let us do it all now. Like why does everything take time? Like why do we have to do things properly and carefully and by the books? Like let us do what we want. Like
Right, I know.
I
But
know.
but
Yeah.
one thing that's been really I've been grateful for is, when they first told me that I was going to have to do 3,000 hours of supervised work, I was like, are you kidding me? 3,000 hours. Like it was torture, but I also am really appreciative of the fact that I can bring this perspective, like you said, like into maybe substance abuse clinics, or, some of the, or like prison populations, or any of these populations that have a huge amount, or have huge populations of undiagnosed ADHD, very likely, right? And like
Mhm.
being able to bring that, like you said, bring that perspective, bring that awareness, being able to look for those signs that might get overlooked, I think is so important for any field that we end up in. Having this knowledge is going to be so helpful, and
Yeah.
being able to connect those dots, which I think ADHD brains are
I
really good at.
know prison and addiction, those two things you've mentioned, it's huge there. Like there have been studies done and research being done looking into prisons because it makes sense when you're impulsive and like you don't really think about what you're doing, and you're more likely to commit offences without even realizing. Like, I've been caught speeding, and I got fines and everything for that. And, that's something very minor, but, I have been in trouble with the law, technically. I think everyone with ADHD has. So it's no wonder these things happen. And like, especially if you're impulsive and you do certain things in the heat of the moment, you just can't control that impulsion, particularly when it's emotions as well. Like, I don't know, let's take a crime of passion or something. Someone with ADHD is more likely to commit that than, a neurotypical, and it just makes sense. And then people with ADHD are more prone to addiction as well because we just need that constant hit of dopamine. And, we just get that one little taster and that's it. Unfortunately, it's a dark road for us. So I think it's very important what you're doing to bring awareness as well to those two aspects. It's very, very important. Work needs to be done there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I don't know where I'll end up. I'd love to, initially when I first started, I was like, well, I'm going to have a private practice and I'm going to work with women who are exactly like me. And now I'm realizing I'm like, oh no, there's so many options out there. Who knows where my ADHD brain will take me in the next few
Yeah,
years?
just enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. Like, that's I'm exactly the same because, I'm like, I have no idea where all of this stuff is going to take me. It's like, oh, maybe I wanted to do this. Maybe I wanted to do that. And it's like, there's so many things going on in your head. And you're just like, I don't know what's going to be right for me. So I've just got the mentality, okay, just take each day as it comes. Everything will fall into place the way that it's meant to be. And, you will be doing something which, you're good at and you will enjoy. That's what I take with life anyway. Like the things you enjoy at, you're going to be really good at. But with us neurodivergent, if we're good at something, we are really good at it, and we can excel with those things. Like I think that's one of the biggest strengths of having ADHD is we can really be good at our hobbies and strengths. Like it's insane what we're capable of.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I was curious too, because I feel like I want to ask you about medication too, given the fact that I'm like, I don't always get to sit down with a pharmacist. So, uh, the medication stigma here is real. And I think also it's expensive. Like I was saying before we started recording, right? It's so
Oh
crazy.
my
So,
god, like that,
uh,
yeah. I
well,
needed
and
a
not only
moment to recover from that.
well,
Like,
and not only that, but my insurance company won't have generics because they're not as rigorously. I assume they won't deal with generics because they're not held to the same rigor. Is that true? Does that sound right?
I wouldn't say so, no. So
Okay.
basically, with
In
generic
this
medication,
category, just in this category, not in all
okay.
categories, but just in the category of stimulants.
I mean, my view is I wouldn't assume so because, what happens is when a branded product comes out, they have the patent for a certain amount of time. And then
Mm.
when that patent is over, you can make generic forms of it. And this is with all medication. You have generic forms of all controlled drugs, from painkillers to stimulants, and I think those are the two really, which are in, controlled Schedule 2s, with the same stimulants. And I don't think that they're clinically there isn't as much difference. But the thing is with the patented brands, particularly with something like Concerta, they have a very unique release profile, which is patented to that brand. And that's where I think sometimes the confusion can come when it with generic products as well. So I guess it does depend on the type of medication you're on, the way it's, the formulation of it. Is it slow release? Is it immediate release? To make sure that the bioavailability in the body is going to be the same. And then, you've got excipients as well, the things which are added into it to, form the tablet or capsule itself. Are we going to have a reaction to that compared to the branded one? So there's a lot of things to consider. But I mean, from my experience and my own opinion, I don't think that there is much difference, but it does depend on why that is a patented brand. Like why, what makes it unique, that product, that it's got that branding, that patent. Is it something that can be replicated safely and clinically? So yeah, I guess there's it's a bit ambiguous.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts on drug holidays? Because that's another sort of controversial topic with stimulants, which is, so many doctors that say, oh, don't do them on the weekends and you shouldn't, don't get addicted to them. And right. And I'm like, well, are you addicted to like blood pressure medication if you take it every day?
This is literally what it is. So, we think, okay, we have to take this every day. Oh, I don't want to rely on it. Oh, I'm going to become addicted to it. But then again, like you've just said, if you have to take medication to keep your blood pressure at check, why don't people turn an eye to that? Like, they turn a blind eye to that. Sorry, it's normal. But with us, it's like, oh, you shouldn't rely on that. Like, that's not good. And it's just like, oh, come on. Like, this helps us function. What you can do easily. You can just go see some dishes in the sink, wash them up, and that's it. Like, for us, we sit there in chronic stress for about a week knowing we've got these dishes to wash up, and we just cannot do it. And then we just, we think about it every single day. Our mind is just constantly, and, that's just one little example. And it's like, if we take something to make the quality of our life better, why are people so judgmental about it? And I think that comes with everything to do with mental health. And I know ADHD specifically isn't a mental health condition. It's, to do with the brain essentially, but I think it still is very similar. And, it goes down to stigma as well. And, there is little or no risk to addiction with these drugs if you are using them as directed. As long as you are taking them properly, as long as you are not misusing them, I've read some stuff about people, crushing the long release tablet so they can get like a really quick high. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I know people were doing that with OxyContin. I don't know if you saw the documentary on Disney Plus. It was I can't remember what it was called, but that's how people were abusing that drug.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
all
that
of the
one.
Purdue.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Right. And
yeah.
yeah,
It's
and I think
true.
that's probably why it got the stigma of being a controlled substance and being abused, and people are so afraid of it. But at the same time, I think it's true, like you said, there's so many stereotypes about what the dysfunction is around ADHD. So people are assuming that it's like, oh, well, you're making excuses, and you could, if you really wanted to do the dishes or any of these things that your executive function that you're struggling with, if you really wanted to, you would, right? So there's like I think it comes down to like what it is specifically that we struggle with, and where the prejudice is, or the misogyny, or the all of these sort of cultural
Yeah,
stereotypes that are
exactly.
involved in what we're struggling. So it's so nuanced. But I think it's
Yeah.
why this medication versus you know
Yeah. I
like
also
blood
wanted to
pressure medication is why it's so different. Yeah.
yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add on because you mentioned something about drug holidays, and my prescriber told me the same thing because she was like, yeah, so you're going to be constantly doing things. You need to rest. So don't try not to take it on the weekends, once you're titrated up to your dose. I tried that, and oh my God, like I have never been so irritable in my life. The thing is, what I don't know if the prescribers know this, I assume they would, is, once when you start taking this medication, that the natural way dopamine is produced in your body, it's like, oh, there's a medication doing that. I don't need to do that anymore. So, the natural dopamine releases isn't going to be as high as it normally was for you. I mean, it wasn't even high to begin with. So, anything that was there, it's not really going to be there anymore because the medication is taking over. And then once you stop that medication, the dopamine release that was normally there is like, oh, wait, what's happening? Do we need to start up again? Like, I'm not prepared. I've not got any dopamine for you. Like, I'm so sorry. And you end up in a dopamine crash, essentially, like, withdrawal. That's literally what it is. It's a withdrawal. And I have found that when I've forgotten to take my medication sometimes, like, very typical of, us ADHDers, forgetfulness is very, very typical. I've had to make some serious interventions to make sure that I don't do that. But so the day I missed it, like, I was so irritable. I remember I was flying back from holiday. Our flight was delayed. There were kids running around. It was hot. There was a fly, and I could just focus on that fly. It was buzzing everywhere. It was doing my head in. I was hungry. Like, I was so uncomfortable. I was ready to kill, I'm telling you. And then when I finally got home and I took my medication the next day, I still felt really bad. Like, I just felt really out of it. And it's just, you know what? It's because our bodies are not used to not having that level of dopamine. And some people might take this as a bad thing because they're like, oh, you're addicted to it. Like, you rely on it and this and that. And it's like, no. It's exactly the same to any sort of medication where you need to withdraw off. It doesn't make it unsafe. It just means that you need to get your body used to it. So, if you want to take drug holidays, it does depend as well on the type of formulation. Because if you're on a long acting one, it's going to be very, very difficult to just stop it one day because, it all takes time to come in and out of the system. Short acting ones, I think might be a little bit easier to take a holiday off. But, you need to withdraw down because, like with school holidays, if, the child wants to just go have fun, without, feeling that they, have to behave at school, essentially. Like, I do understand the logic behind it. So I guess it does make sense. But at the same time, it's like, we need this medication to function. Like, it helps us live. Why, there's nothing wrong with having to take it every day if we need it. Like, and that, I think that's the stigma as well, which we need to kind of, fight back against. It's like, okay, you can take all this stuff for your physical health, but we need some of this to make sure that we don't go crazy. That what's wrong with that?
Right.
We just want to live healthily. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I just think it needs a rebrand. If it was remarketed as like, this is productivity and medication, and this will help your workers like sit at their desk from 9 to 5, and this is going to help people be cogs in the capitalist machinery, then I think it would get a much better, it just needs a new PR campaign. That's all.
yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah.
And the other thing I hear a lot about when it comes to drug vacations is that, like, you can get used to the dosage, and so you have to take holidays so that you can then have it meaningful. Like, otherwise, you have to keep increasing the dosage. So you should take holidays so that your body doesn't get used to it, so that it still has impact. Is there any truth to that?
So there is a little bit. I do actually want to look into this more because it is something which I'm intrigued about because, I guess with all kinds of medication, you can become tolerant to it because, your body gets used to that dose and then it's not doing as much anymore. So, don't quote me on this. I don't know too much about this, but I do think that there is an aspect of needing to take some sort of break, after you've been having it for a long time. So the NHS, they follow something called NICE guidance. And this is, healthcare advice, which, all professionals should be following when, treating, monitoring, prescribing. And it does say that if you are using this medication for more than a year, to review with your doctor if you still need it. So I don't know, potentially they withdraw you off it. They try and see if, there've been ways for you to manage it with the coaching or lifestyle interventions. And, people do manage their ADHD without medication. Like, there are a lot of people who do that, but, for some of us, we do need it. And if we do need it lifelong, there's nothing wrong with that. But I am curious to see about the tolerance, because I have a feeling there might be a small aspect to that, um, and it will be very interesting because that can make it quite difficult to maintain medication, maintain doses if if that actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Well, thank you. I always feel like I have so many questions about medication, but when it comes down to it, I'm like, when I actually get a chance to research it, I'm like, I don't know where to start. So.
Send me a DM anytime you want if you've got questions. Like this is what I've been trained to learn about, is like how drugs work in the body. So, if you've got anything you want to know, just let me
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions, but I'm going to keep, for the
know.
sake of the brevity of this interview, I want to move on. So I like to ask my guests if you could rename ADHD to something else.
Oh
Do
my
you
god,
have
sorry,
another name?
my ring light just fell.
Oh,
Sorry,
that's
I
okay.
was moving because my leg was cramping up, and now it's all my whole really unprofessional setup is just come apart. Okay, I think that's okay. I'm literally balancing my laptop on a Dyson Airwrap top, and I've got a ring light which is balancing on like the what's it, the little legs
Oh
behind
yeah,
it. And
tripod. Yeah, I love
it's
it.
like it's literally like leaning over about to fall. Sorry, what did you ask?
So if you could rename ADHD to something else, would you call it something else? Do you have another name for it?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. Um, oh gosh, I can't think of something, but I can't think of anything specific. But I think it would have to be centered about how we don't have a deficit of attention. We do have attention. We just don't put it on the right things that we are meant to. So I don't know, like, you know, I have no idea. I mean, I wouldn't even name it as a disorder, first
Hmm.
of all, as well, because I feel like that can make it quite negative. Um, I would like to put some kind of, neurodiversity sort of label on it as well. So, you know, I want to have a think about that,
All
actually, because
right, that's
that's
fine.
a really good question.
I know
Yeah.
I ask it. I love getting the responses, but I also like I don't have the perfect answer either. So that's why I ask everybody else. I'm crowdsourcing because I'm like I don't know. There's so many aspects to it, right? Even just or the
Yeah.
emotional aspect too, which I think most women, especially, come to their ADHD diagnosis from relating to the emotional stuff, the shame, the stigma, the depression. So it's like, why is none of the emotional stuff is even listed in the DSM? Or, so
That's the thing
yeah.
which they're looking to potentially do, because that's another part of my research. Oh my gosh, dopamine deficient divas
Yeah.
for women. Oh my god, sorry, that just came to my head. You know, I think that's quite a good one. Yeah, what was I saying? Yes, because they are looking to potentially add the emotional symptoms into there, because the emotional liability is insane. Oh my gosh, I'm just thinking about times where it affected me, but I do think that the emotional aspect to ADHD is not looked into enough, or particularly with women, because we just get labeled as these sort of like hormonal erratic creatures who cry and get stressed at every little inconvenience. And so when we go to these our doctors with these emotional thoughts and feelings, um we just aren't taken seriously, even if it is to do with ADHD.
Mhm.
But that's a whole other topic when it comes to
Oh,
women and their symptoms. Yeah, ready to fight every doctor out there about this.
right. Well, one thing especially the hyperactivity element, because I think that actually is a deterrent for many women because they don't think of themselves as hyperactive at all because so much of the hyperactivity is internalized. And I heard the term hyperarousal recently as a much better term for the H and I just think it's so perfectly sums up that experience of like being dismissed as overdramatic, like you said, right? Like we feel things so much
Oh my
stronger,
god,
right? That
yeah.
right. But it's so I think the hyper arousal speaks to not only the busy brain and the overthinking and all of that craziness, but the rumination. Like I feel like hyper arousal encompasses so much of my experience with hyperactivity than the
Yeah.
term hyperactivity. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Would you say sensory overstimulation as well would be tied into that at all? I don't know if
Oh,
you
oh my
experienced that
goodness.
as well.
Absolutely. In fact,
Yeah,
for a long time, I think, after I was diagnosed with ADHD, I had the big question of there's so much overlap between autism and ADHD too,
yeah,
right?
about to
So
mention.
when I started looking into a lot of the sensory issues and a lot of the just peculiarities, for lack of a better word, especially social peculiarities, right? And friendships
Yeah.
and social cues. And, I, for a long time, was like, okay, are we actually talking about autism? Are we all being misdiagnosed with ADHD when so many more of us have autism because there's such a huge overlap? And I think really that came down to, um, I think I
You've
lost you.
frozen up.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
sorry, you
oh, there
froze.
you are. Okay. So
Okay.
I don't know if you could still hear me. But anyway, the I think there's, so much overlap too that I think it's a really fascinating field to look at neurodivergence in terms of like the types of brains and how we're reacting to our environment and why we are getting ADHD symptoms as a
Mm,
result of the reactions that we're having to our environments and a pandemic and some of the craziness that has been happening over the last few years that has
yeah.
exacerbated so many of our ADHD symptoms. So yeah, it's super fascinating. That's why I've been talking about it every week for 2 years counting.
Yeah, no,
Because
I
I'm
do
like,
completely agree with you. Like, I feel I was looking at the autism criteria as well, and I was just like, oh God, like I'm not doing this again to myself, am I? Because I do think there is a very huge overlap, and I do feel they can come hand in hand with each other. So, it's not surprising if people are diagnosed with, both. I don't like to say the word disorder, but both conditions because it completely makes sense. Yeah.
right? Yeah, I know. And I'm really not sure where one begins and the other ends. And I don't know if you could even decide. But it
Yeah, it's
is,
like the
I
chicken
like
and the
to,
egg, isn't
right?
it?
But I do feel like there's a lot of stuff about autism that I feel very called out, or especially on Twitter. I feel like there's a lot of people on Twitter who will be like, when you're talking about ADHD, they're like, no, you're actually talking about autism when you're talking about that stuff. And I was like, am I like, and then I would have to go into these deep dives as to whether or not I'm actually autistic. And then, yeah. So yeah, it's constant. But anyway, I really want to make sure people can find you and help you because it sounds like you are doing such incredible work and with
Oh,
this
thank
research.
you.
And are you getting help? And how can especially other mental health professionals, like how can people reach out to you and find you and support you?
Yeah, so my Instagram and TikTok handle, sorry, is the same. So it's Little Miss underscore ADHD. Sorry, I had to think about it. Little Miss underscore ADHD underscore. I had to get a bit creative because the name I wanted was taken by what it looks like a spam account, which just makes it even worse. But so yeah, I use those two platforms because I want to, especially Instagram. I make posts about things which I've researched about and found out, and I just want to educate people about ADHD as well, because there's loads of great pages out there which kind of it's good for awareness to understand how it impacts us. But I think it's also really interesting and useful to know the sort of like the science behind it as well. And I feel as a pharmacist I have some great insight onto the medication aspect of it. So I'm preparing my next post actually. It's part of my ADHD science series. So I'm going to be splitting up each of the different medications and kind of explaining them all in detail because I feel a lot of people have questions when it comes to medicine. So yeah, and I'll be posting regular updates about my research journey and everything. But it is going to be a very long process, which I know none of us like to hear. But I appreciate any support. If anyone, I'm all my messages are always open. Like there's women who message me all the time for support. Like there's a few women who unfortunately are quite lonely, and they just don't have someone who understands them. So I like to be that voice for someone because I didn't have anyone when I was dealing with all of this. So if I can be that person for someone, I'm more than happy to. And I always put this out there as well. I always say, if you need help with getting your GB to listen to you, just let me know. Contact me. I will even be on speakerphone with you at your appointment because I know how hard it can be, and I have so much like anger and passion about all of this. Like I will put your GP in place. Trust me. So yeah, I think I went off on a tangent there.
That
I
reminds me, that's a really
think.
great job for somebody who's wants to be an advocate is like, you know how they have like responsible adults in interrogation rooms in the UK? You could be the responsible
Yeah.
adult in a doctor's office, especially with the diagnosis. Because I've joked about that in the past, where I'm like, if you find this entire process of the diagnosis, the making appointments, having to go sit in a waiting room, then going overtime, like all of the things that are incredibly stressful about going to even visit a doctor for anything, then you might want to look into ADHD.
Yeah.
Like
You know
that's
what's
pretty.
really funny about this is like, I don't know about you, but I feel we're the kind of people, we can't do this for ourselves. But when it comes to someone else, like if someone needs me to bring a doctor for them or help them clean their house or do some papers, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I'll help you and I'll be really good at it. But when it comes to me, I'm just like, no, I've literally been sitting in a pile of dirty laundry for about a month. I know I've just helped you do literally your whole house, but I just cannot do mine. It's really weird to explain.
Right, yeah, well, it's all about where the dopamine is. Yeah, well, thank you so much. This has been really delightful, and I appreciate your
And
perspective on so many things too, not only the cultural Indian background. I don't get a lot of Indian guests, and I know it's because there is a lot of stigma. I think it's also, I didn't even get to talk to you about I know you had said some wonderful things about how your father reacted too, and
oh, he's my hero.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's
I
just
owe him, yeah, I owe him my life really. So I did make a little TikTok about that. So like, it's on my page if anyone wants to go
right. I
look.
do. I highly recommend it because I think it's so wonderful to know that your parents have been so supportive, because I know that's not everybody's experience, but
Yeah.
yeah, that is a journey in itself, right? Is educating our
Yeah. I
family.
think
But yeah. Well, anyway, it's been so wonderful. Thank you so much. I really
that's all right.
appreciated your
Thank you
time.
so much for having me as well. Like this, it means a lot to be given a platform to be able to speak about these things. It's really empowering to also come across other people who are so like-minded and who really understand. Because I feel like it can be really lonely. And when you find your people, you're like, oh my God, like this is just so nice. And to be able to speak to someone like yourself who, you've done some amazing things and you're doing really well at what you do as well. It's amazing. So thank you, honestly,
Well,
for your
I
time.
think oh, it is so validating, right? And I always say talking to another ADHD woman feels like unbuttoning a too tight pair of pants, because it just feels like it just feels like, oh my God, this is so comfortable. We speak a
Yeah,
different language, but I also feel like that rage, that desire, that justice mentality that so many of us have, I think can be really difficult because it makes us want to quit if we're not seeing
mm,
change immediately. So I feel like
yeah,
when we have these conversations and I think of how many people, how much more this is spreading
mm,
exponentially every year, and how much more information is out there, this is a huge ship that needs to be steered and turned
yeah.
around. And we are doing it,
Off
right?
the port, just almost just need to give it a massive kick.
Right.
Punch it, just push it off the port. Like we need to get this rolling now. It's been long enough.
Right, but I feel like it is happening slowly but surely, that we are affecting change if we kind of step back and take a macro look at how much is changing and how many people are advocating and putting information out there. And like, I was diagnosed because I feel like it's like those shampoo commercials from the 80s of like, she told two friends and she told two friends and then she told two friends, right? I'm like,
Oh my
so
God,
it,
that's
it
a great
is
analogy.
right.
Yeah.
It does feel like we are even though it's agonizingly slow, it does feel like we can kind of really change the system one day at a time.
Yeah, definitely. It's always difficult trying to make changes in society, and you're always going to be met with skeptics. Even when you feel like you've reached a peak of something good. I guarantee you there's people out there who still don't believe, cancer is real. Even though there's been so much research and studies and innovative therapies and all of that, like it is life. But I think it makes us feel good knowing that we are doing something to make a positive change. And yeah, that's all that I want really. Is like, even if I help just one woman, that's I will die a happy woman. I really will.
Right? Yeah, I think that too. It's just like if I can save one woman from going through what I went through, I feel like it will have all been worth
Yeah,
it.
you just
So
want to wrap
yeah.
them in bubble wrap and just be like, it's okay, it's okay, I've got you, I'll help you, don't worry about
Uh,
it. Like,
it's so true.
yeah,
All right. Well, thank you again. It's been absolutely
yeah.
lovely.
Thank you as well. All right,
Um,
bye.